and then we glaze it and we fire it again.
Do you call that bisque firing?
The bisque firing, yeah. The first firing. So since we're doing low fire, I talked about that the first day. The bisque fire temperature is essentially the same as the glaze fire temperature. For mid-range and high fire clay, the bisque fire temperature is the same as what we do, and then the high fire they go even hotter. But that
is the low fire, is that like cone 4, or what cone is that? Because I know that sometimes I read articles and they talk
Sure.
about different cones, so low fire.
that would be cone 04.
Oh, okay.
We have this funny scale. Can I borrow your pen?
Yep.
Something like cone 019, that's decals. Somewhere between cone 08 to 04. I don't have these all memorized, but I want to say 04 is like, I don't know, 1950 Fahrenheit. I think 08 is like maybe 1780.
It says this on the glaze container.
Well, yeah. So this would be like a decal and a luster. Luster is when you put on gold or palladium or silver. We don't do that here. It's really stinky. You need very well ventilated. We're low fire. There are these things called cones, and they come from a product from the Orton Cone Company. The cones melt at a specific temperature, okay? And there are these little, they're not angled, but you put them in a little block of clay at a slight, usually you'll do like 3 of them, and they will melt at a specific temperature, and the cone will start to droop over like that, okay? And so you can look in the peephole of the kiln, and you can know what the actual temperature is. And the temperature measures what we call heat work, or the cone measures heat work, which is time plus temperature. So, you can achieve cone 04. It's not just, we have a thing called a pyrometer, a pyrometer. It measures fire essentially, as opposed to a thermometer, which for your oven, which measures temperature, or a thermometer. But these get confusing, but I just want to explain it, because then there's this around approximately 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, there's this inflection point, and then the cones start counting up. So a lot of the firings, a lot of the times, the way that they refer to low fire is an 06 firing. Okay?
So the
And we're
articles I read, none of them
using
were
an 06 clay, and you need to pick a glaze that matches the clay, which matches the firing temperature. What I do in my studio is mid-range, which is cone kind of 4 through 7, okay? Mid-range is very easy to achieve in electric kiln. Cone 6 is somewhere around like 2170 Fahrenheit. Up here, high fire, cone 9 and 10, that's getting up to 2300 to 2350 Fahrenheit. That's going to be your true porcelains, and hotter than that. For example, we have kiln shelves and posts, which we call the kiln furniture. Those all can go hotter than cone 10, right? They can go to cone 13 or 14. I've seen videos in Jingdezhen in China of them doing beautiful porcelain, and we use a brick kiln, but they'll make these kilns which are lined with a fiber blanket, which is crazy, right? You can take kaolin, the clay material, and spin it into fibers and make a blanket material which can withstand the thermal shock much better. And so to get the beautiful oxblood reds in Jingdezhen, they'll take it up to like cone 12, open the door of the kiln and crash cool it down almost 1,000 degrees and then close the door again. There's some other stuff I can talk about, quartz inversion.
Crackle when that happens?
Well, as long as so there's a thing around
whatever. We'll keep going with this
11,
forever.
like 1070 called
Sorry.
quartz inversion. Basically, quartz silica will expand and contract both on the way up and on the way down in temperature. So you have to go slowly through that stage.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, there's all, I mean, it can, clay can get really technical
Right.
really quick. I'm happy to share it, but I think the best thing is like Cheryl's watching videos and getting into it, and that's great. So when you're ready, the information is there. There's books, there's videos, there's YouTube, there's people like me who will talk you through it. And ceramics studios are very generous environments usually where people will share and talk to each other. Anyway, but just so you know, this is what we're doing
Oh,
here.
four.
We're doing low fire, 0604.
Okay.
And, okay, but we bisque fire the piece for a couple reasons. It allows the piece to be cleaned. It also makes it easy to handle, right? You know how fragile the greenware is? So that's why we don't do the single firings here. But if you're in a situation where you really needed to save on energy costs, you would probably want to try and figure out a way to do a single firing. So the steps in glazing, I'll just sort of take you through it and then talk to you about the glazes. I always, like everything I do in a ceramic studio, I start with a bucket of water and a big sponge, you know? Dust and whatnot can get in here. This is why if we use sand, you know, it can be a real problem. So you want to clean it with a damp sponge. And you want to just make sure you get any dust off. But you don't want to saturate the piece. Okay? We are relying on the bisqueware to act like a sponge and absorb the water in the glazes, leaving the glaze material on the surface. And the dust, the reason why we take off the dust is it can cause pinholing, imperfections. It also, if you have like bisqueware crumbs in here, and then you get it into the glazes, then somebody else might end up with your crumbs in their piece and it kind of ruins it. Okay, so the first step is always cleaning it. Okay, the next thing that you want to do is prepare the glazes. We have a pretty easy time in the studio because everything is in a jar. Okay? There's two kinds of glazes in here. And I went through a couple of these bins, but then I realized there's more, so I'll try to look at these. The situation is, you know, is that technically the glazes in the cabinet there are for the BFA class. But starting last summer at my, like the first class I taught here last spring, I guess, was honestly kind of a bad situation because we had no glazes provided to us because the whole thing was always continuing ed has to buy their own glazes. And I talked to someone who took a class here, someone who now works at the 92Y, and she was like, oh yeah, I took a class there 10 years ago and I had to buy my own glazes. She's like, everything I made was gray because I bought one jar of, and
It's
to me,
$20 a jar. So
yeah,
it's like,
and so to me that's a really bad situation for, you know, beginners or whatnot. So what happened though is like some of these glazes are, the company is closing or whatever. Hello. Oh, you guys are here early.
yeah.
I was like planning to repeat all this. Anyway, so they've shifted things out of that cabinet, like the leftovers, and we have access to it. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so there's a bunch of random jars, but the we're just covering the first couple things and all. Yeah. Oh, sorry. We have a bunch of random jars, and what I was doing was just trying to organize them. There's two kinds of things. Oh, sorry, yeah. We're coexisting with the open studio, so we all are just sharing the space. Oh, thank you, sorry. Yeah. There's two basic things. There's underglaze, and there's glazes. Underglaze is just, and some of these aren't even open yet.
Wow.
But underglaze is just what it sounds like. It's designed to go on first, and then you would put basically a clear glaze over it. I actually brought in more, but this is some of in the last spring, because we had no glazes, I bought a gallon of clear glaze. It was like $25, you know? And so I still have some of this low fire clear glaze. And so if you want to use, you know, the great thing about underglaze, it's basically just pigment with a binder. Some of them this is really pasty. This shouldn't be this way, so I'm gonna add a little bit of water to it. The binder is usually something, I don't know exactly, it's you know, if I was gonna mix it, I would use what we call CMC gum, which is I believe, carboxymethylcellulose. It's a plant gum, food grade plant gum. It's the same thing that is probably in a Wendy's Frosty. It's in your toothpaste. It's in fondant, right? You can buy CMC gum. It's generally food grade, and that's added to these glazes.
I know we're gonna get to it because it's popping into my head. Do we have like a good collection of brushes to use, or should we bring our own in?
I saw that.
Oh, you can take them out?
You check them out upstairs.
Oh,
But if you
awesome.
want good brushes, you should bring your own.
Okay.
The glazes won't necessarily harm the brushes, they won't, but they are rougher than paint. But
Yeah, okay. Oh, but I didn't, okay, you could check them out. It's not like, because I saw some brushes in there and I thought maybe that was our only
I
selection.
think you check them out, and I think they have more than that.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the underglazes are basically stain, ceramic stain with this binder and water. The binder slows down the drying time. It makes it so you can extend your stroke. So all of these glazes too, these anything you buy in a pint, commercial glazes, they all have this binder in it. I'm only telling you this because if you go to another studio where they have like a big bucket that's like a dipping glaze, those are probably don't have any binder in it. So they're more for dipping and they're gonna dry much faster. Whereas all these glazes will dry, but they'll dry a little bit slowly because the binder is, the gum is in there. The gum eventually helps it stick to the piece once it's dry, and it gives you the better brush stroke. Okay, if you're looking to really get nice designs with painting, I would personally use underglaze for that.
Wait, I'm sorry. So you do underglaze like purple, and then what? And overglaze.
Then you could
of a
do
different-
clear glaze or leave it raw. you
Okay.
know.
Okay.
You don't have to use
You don't
underglaze.
need it, or you.
You
And
don't
then,
have to. It's more if you want to like paint, like
Oh.
more fine pictures.
but you have to use an overglaze.
Yes, because it doesn't have any silicone in it.
Okay.
It
Is
doesn't
that
have.
that's underglaze?
If you want to leave it if you're making a sculpture, you could
Yeah.
leave it raw. It would be matte.
Yeah.
Okay, there's nothing that's going to make this glossy. No silica, no glass
Yeah.
former.
But it's not sealed. So like if it got really wet, that might affect
It would still
too.
absorb it. It'd be like a flower pot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depends on what you're doing. Right? If you're making something functional, you want to get the glaze everywhere.
Okay.
Anyway, so we have underglaze. The underglazes are basically going to be true to color. The color basically in these comes from, it's almost like a glaze. They've probably made
Yeah.
a glaze, ground it up into a powder. That's what we call a stain. Sometimes they call it a Mason stain, but Mason, that'd be like Xerox. Mason is like a company. There are other stains out there, but often you'll hear them referred to as Mason stains. So these are underglazes, and I can show you guys another thing later. I think I should put a piece over there for getting it fired.
That would probably, if it works out, that we could have one of these bins or two of them just to separate like the underglazes from the
So
glazes.
these now are all underglazed.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that
These
would
are
be helpful.
glazes. I haven't looked at those.
Okay, so, that's helpful just for starters,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, here's another one. Chestnut brown underglaze. Okay, the other thing that's complicated here, just because they have this system where they slap a label over it. Once again, a lot of these are really, they need water added to them. My water is pretty clean, so I'll do it, but, don't add dirty water. So on here, you want to prepare the glaze. You can stir it, or in these small jars, if you make sure it's capped up, you can shake it. But like I said, what is provided to us sometimes are the old ones. And then the other problem is I don't have test tiles for these. So you often will have to Google. And so I can help you, but this would be Duncan foliage green, and you could look that up. And then people, they ask me all the time, that's fine, I'm here to answer questions, and I really, there's no bad questions or dumb questions. But people say like, well, how much is this one to apply? It's always the same, and it says on the jar. So mix well, apply 2 to 3 coats, fire to cone 06, water cleanup. Okay? So in general, everything we're doing here is going to be a painted glaze. They're not big enough to dip. You could pour glaze like on the inside of a cup and then
Can
pour
we
it back
mix?
out.
Something
Mixed
like
glazes?
that has a You can't paint the inside of
Well, you
that.
could pour it in and then pour it
You're
back out.
allowed to do that.
You
Okay.
can mix glazes.
Like if I
I'll
want
get
to
to
do
that.
like
Yeah.
1 and 2.
Yeah, I'll get to that. So at SVA, we only have paint on glazes. And once again, this is more if you go to another studio that has like buckets or whatever. If you can pour glazes, pour a coat, that's equal to if you dip the piece. If I dipped it into a bucket of glaze and I go dip, 2, 3, 3-second dip and then out, that's equal to painting 3 or 4 coats. So I know it says 2 to 3. I would say 3 or maybe 4, and I'll talk to you guys about that coverage as well. So I would say plan to paint 3 to 4 coats, let it dry between coats. I would alternate a horizontal and a vertical application. And then here, to your question, more than one glaze. Yes, you can do more than one glaze.
Cool.
I would do something like 2 coats of one, because you want to get enough of the material to really give the glaze effect. What it's going to do, I don't know. I'm always like firing test tiles in my studio to see like what combinations, if they do anything interesting. So I can't predict this. Google's not going to be able to predict it for you. You just have to test it. But I would do 2 coats of one glaze and then 2 coats of the other. Take notes, see what happens. They may do interesting things. It could be strange. It could be ugly when they're combining.
And so if it turns out, you fire it and you hate it, you can like totally reglaze it?
Yes, if you can reglaze, you can paint more glaze on top. The problem is you now have this glassy surface and covering up the bisqueware, and it's not absorbent anymore. So it's hard to get the second round of glaze to stick as well. But the good thing is, back to the CMC gum, all of these glazes have CMC gum in them, and so they stick.
I was going to say another trick, I don't know if it would work for glazes, would be to put a teeny bit of soap in it.
Of what?
Soap, like ivory, like dishwashing soap. That's what I do.
Soap would,
Maybe it wouldn't work for glazes.
I think it would act as a resist.
Okay, because with paint.
I've never heard that.
Oh, you
With
can.
paint, if I wanted to paint on wax paper with like some sort of watercolory paints,
Yeah.
if I put a teeny bit just to dab it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, not fair. It's a thought.
You can try
Yeah.
it.
I mean, this is, I saw somebody posted this. They went, because John Britt, this guy, we were
Yes,
talking about
John.
this glaze guru, he's got books and stuff and he does workshops. And someone I know who's, I just like social media friends, but she went to his workshop recently and she posted, she's like, John Britt said, you can do anything you want just as long as you take notes, right?
funny.
Because if you get a result. Okay, so sorry for all the talking, but let me just show you in practice like what this would mean. Personally for this, I would just pour this one on the inside.
Careful.
This glaze is like a little chunky.
Cool.
Usually like in my studio, I have like I have 1 gallon buckets, 2.5 gallon buckets.
And that's going to turn out green?
Yeah. So this probably has iron in it. Oh, that's the other thing. I always forget because I'm so deep. That's a good question. I had a professor put signs everywhere. He was like, glaze is not paint. Okay? So that's why I pointed out that the underglazes are pretty true to color because they've already been fired and ground up or however they make the stains.
Okay.
Glazes are not foliage green. This is some iron is in there, and the iron is going to make like a green. Like once again, like if you know Celadon glaze, like a classic, like Chinese originally, and then spread to Korea and Japan, and then the rest of the world. That is basically a clear glaze with a trace amount, like 0.5% or 1% of iron in it. And the iron mixed with the glaze materials will bring out that greenish blush or that bluish blush, beautiful. And it will show the, carving and things like that. The other thing with glazes is that, they can be so thin, but that refraction of light can be really beautiful. And that brings out, it has to be kind of a clear glaze. But
Are all of our glazes opaque as opposed to transparent, and also?
No.
Okay, some of
But that
Well, say on
on one
the
hand,
car.
this is why I was just like chatting with like the Jin's boss, who I just met for the very first time.
Daniel, yeah.
Yeah, Dan, whatever his name is. I know I have his email. But I was like, this is crazy. Why do you have 60 glazes? And it's like, well, some other instructor wanted that, you know, because it would be much easier if we had like, here are the 10 glazes. We have 10 test styles. You kind of know, you know, to get into it as a beginner.
Yeah.
Even in my own studio, like basically I have like a clear glaze, a white glaze, a clear matte, sparkly white, and then I have a bunch of underglazes and, you know, I don't know, a turquoise glaze.
Yeah.
Like I don't, you know, I kind of make a lot of things happen with a small amount of glazes. You can see this is like almost sort of
I
drying.
think it's cool, like just like that. Like I don't
Yeah,
know.
I could leave it like that, but let me just show you. So painting, like, you can see how, if I just keep like,
It's pretty thick.
it's still wet. You know, if I'm just smearing it around.
But that's
So
the consistency it should be, because it's pretty wet. I mean, I know you added water, so you could have made it thicker or thinner or whatever, but what you're
Yeah.
doing now is pretty much the way it should
yeah,
be.
but I'm saying you want to let that first coat dry before you start painting a second coat, and it might. You can see it's starting to dry already.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my first coat. And over time, you'll gain some knowledge of, you know, how this works. The other thing is that there are a lot of these glazes. There are some test styles of the ones in there, but these like crystalline glazes, and that's a really cool thing that's like very specific, mostly to low fire glazes. That there will be like these little gritty chunks in there. These chunks are just because it's not mixed well. But the crystalline glazes have these little chunks, and that'll be like the Milky Way glaze. It's like a blue glaze, and then there'll be like these white tops. And so those little chunks are like hardened glaze material. And so you want to get those chunks evenly distributed. All the gum and binder in the glaze helps do that. Okay, you can see this is dry. So I'm going to go ahead and paint my second coat, and like, you know, I did vertical, so now I'm going to go horizontal. I won't, you know, do the whole mug just because I don't want to bore you. But let me see like where I poured it. I'm just going to put a fingernail through. Can you see the thickness of glaze? Like, it's not very thick. I would actually want to get like maybe double that, but it's really like almost microscopic. You see where I put my nail through right there?
Yeah.
Generally what I tell people, I mean, nobody carries change around anymore. Yeah, I mean, you can scratch your nail through if you want. I should have brought some in for a demo, but you want the thickness of the glaze to be somewhere between like the thickness of a dime and the thickness of a nickel. You know, it's like there's some body there to it, but it's not crazy thick. And that gets to my final point here. Like, if you paint it on the glaze and it's just like cracking off your bisqueware immediately, drying and cracking off, you've probably applied it way too thickly. Okay, when we take this up, you know, this is an 06 glaze. When we take it up to 06, which like I said is, you know, somewhere around, I forget exactly, but 1860 maybe is 06. The glaze we want it to melt. It'll become glass-like. Think of it like if it was like a honey or whatever. If there's too much of it, gravity will take over and it'll start to puddle off. And we can't have any glaze on the bottom, right? Because that will melt and then it'll stick to the kiln shelf.
So how far from the bottom do you have to stop so
Alright,
that it
I'm,
won't
like, ready
drip
to
like
That's a
the
good
bottom?
question. So there are a lot of people who will say, oh, you know, because I had students always talk to me like, oh, the glaze ran, but you know, I cleaned it back a quarter of an inch. I don't have a problem with it going almost right up to where it would touch the shelf,
Okay.
but you have to have a proper glaze application over the whole face of your pot. If you've loaded up the glaze on top, you know, it'll get melty, gravity will take over, and it'll just start going down and come off. It won't matter how far you wiped it.
When they fire it, do they put it on something? So, I mean, my concern was more like not to ruin the kiln as opposed to it dripping off the top, or that's not an issue we have to worry about.
No, I mean, so in some teaching studios, they'll fire every pot on a little, what we call a cookie, which is just like a little waster of ceramic to protect the kiln shelf. If you know your glazes are going to run, but the main thing is you want to do a proper application. Like,
Okay.
I've painted 2 coats here.
Okay.
Let me see here. Right, it's still like that 2 coats is super thin. Like I really want, like I said, that's why I usually say paint on 4 coats. Okay, so if you have your proper application up and down the whole wall of it, then you don't need to worry about it running. The other thing is like the design of your piece, right? So let me just paint this here. So I got some glaze on the bottom, but the way I set this up, the way I wrapped it, I think I'm gonna just leave that bottom free of glaze, right? Like, I definitely have to take the glaze off here, and I could simply just wipe it. And then do I want it there, or do I wanna like go with the design of my piece and clean it, you know, so that it's kind of, the glaze comes up to this edge that I put in there, and that might look kind of nice too. Okay, so you know, it's something that once you glaze a little bit, then you start thinking when you're making the piece. And that's the funny thing too with ceramics, is that the more experienced you get, you know, then you start thinking of the result you want, and then you have to be like, well, if I want that result, I need to have this kind of bisqueware, which means I need to make it this way. Right, so I just automatically will put like a bevel and stuff, and then when I'm done glazing, I know exactly where to clean it to. You know, there's like a natural sort of a design element. But like I said, if you did the proper coat, not too enough material to get the color, but not so heavy that it's going to run, you could have it almost all the way up to the point where it would touch. And so you can take any sort of, you know, flat thing, and that'll tell you where it's going to touch the kiln shelf. If you remember with this mug, you know, I put a little reverse bevel in it. So I actually could glaze a little bit of the inside ring if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. Okay. I know there's a lot of talking, probably the most talking this semester. But yeah, I'm here to help.
So if you want to do like Sgraffito, you would do it right onto that glaze. You wouldn't put a second coat and scrape it off.
That's a good question. So that Sgraffito, that was what I was gonna. Let me see it. Oh, good. It didn't get fired. Sgraffito is a different technique. Sgraffito, you know, you can, if you wanted to, you could take some kind of like a needle tool, and you could carve through this glaze. It'll kind of do a design, okay? But Sgraffito is a technique where we paint either a slip or an underglaze. Let me get like a really nice color, royal blue. Right, like look at that. That's a beautiful blue.
Yeah, cool.
There was a jar. After using the royal blue here last session, I actually bought some for my own studio. Okay. Not to confuse you, but this is another technique with sort of related to glazing, but it happens in the greenware stage. Okay, so you just, you know, you can do it right on bone dry clay. You can paint. The amazing thing about underglaze, and once again, it'll say it right on the jar. For opaque coverage, use 3 liberal coats on greenware or bisque, okay? It's amazing that, you know, the glazes only go on bisqueware. That's what they're designed for. The underglaze is more flexible and can go on greenware as well.
What is the greenware?
Greenware is clay that has not been fired.
Oh, okay.
Sort of like, you know, I don't know where the term, it's like if
Yeah.
you're, you know, inexperienced, you're green or whatever.
Yeah. What's the other greenware
Bisque.
and bisque?
Bisqueware, like lobster bisque,
Yeah.
and cooked.
Cool.
Okay, so that's one coat. Let me just paint a second coat. Sgraffito is this technique where you paint a contrasting slip or underglaze that will, like with the red clay, if you just painted a white slip on it, that'll be a lot of contrast.
What's slip?
Slip is just watered down clay. We don't have any here, but white slip is super economical. This is, okay, so I painted 2 coats, and then you can take any sort of tool. I would not recommend the needle tool. It's too sharp. It's going to just kick up debris.
Is this anyone's? It's mine. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Okay, so once again, this is only for greenware, and you do it on where it's leather hard or dry, and I'll pass this around or leave it here. You guys can all try it. So you can.
Wait. Oh, so you can't do it on disc, only greenware?
That's correct because
For Sgraffito?
for Sgraffito.
Okay.
So
That's good to know, because then I won't fire the piece. I would have automatically gone and fired it, so.
oh wait, I think I spelled it wrong. I think it's
Craffito?
I think it's Scravito with a G. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think there's only, anyway, whatever. So you can do big lines, thin lines.
Oh, that's a nice tool, I haven't seen that before.
I don't know. You can use, I often use like a pencil.
Oh, okay.
All right, so here, just try it and then pass it around. So Sgraffito happens, that's another thing with the underglazes. It's an amazing decorative technique. Once you've done Sgraffito, you've really limited yourself for either no glaze or clear glaze. Unless you find some kind of like semi-transparent, like a lighter green or something like that.
Because I didn't notice anything that said transparent, the little bit I looked at.
I mean,
but
yeah,
whatever.
I think I missed one point. Like, so you do the underglaze, and then when do you fire it and then put the overglaze on, or you put the overglaze on and then fire
In
it?
this situation, yes. So sorry to be confusing, but it was just, since we had a question about Sgraffito, I was like, oh, I can just show you real
Yeah.
quick with this greenware piece. So underglaze is amazing, but a little confusing because you can basically use underglaze at any point in the process.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas the glaze is designed to go on the already fired bisqueware, and you can, right? Like
Wait,
this
so
is
this was fired?
yes,
Oh, that's what I didn't realize. Someone put this in
yeah,
a kiln.
yeah. Sorry, I didn't explain that. Yeah, it's been fired once.
No, okay, so just to recap.
He went through the biscuit
That's why
firing,
this
and
one's
now
still-
it's biscuit.
okay, I was like-
That's what I texted you.
Oh, okay,
You can
okay.
use underglaze on either unfired or fired, greenware or this.
Nope, says it right on the jar. Greenware or bisque.
Okay, but since we're doing Sgraffito,
So
it's
the
only
glaze just
unfired.
dries on it, or you fire it with the glaze?
Got it,
Yeah,
okay.
because you can scratch through glaze, but
You have to fire it with the glaze.
Okay.
right, it's just much harder. You can sand this stuff too, but in a shared studio like this, we only do wet sanding.
Yeah.
No dust, please. So you can check out sandpaper. You can get sandpaper from upstairs, but you need like a bowl of water. Just keep your sandpaper wet so you're not generating dust. Do you guys have any questions? I know there's a lot of talking.
Yeah, just so we do the underglaze. Wait, what is it underglaze? Then you fire it, or no?
If you want to use the
Yeah,
underglaze,
if you
and the
wanna use
reason to use the underglaze is either one, you like the color,
Yeah.
or two, you want to do more brush
Squeeze it,
stroke
yeah.
kind of thing because you have more control. Think of the underglaze as more like acrylic paint or oil paint. Where you put it, it's going to stay.
Okay.
Think of the glazes like watercolor.
Okay.
They're gonna
Yeah.
do their own thing a little bit. So the underglazes are more for, the glazes are more for like, I want a broad coverage.
Yeah.
The
It's sort of-
underglazes
it's
are
sort
like
of a
accent.
misnomer. They should call it like undercoat, because it's not really like.
But you
it won't
don't
be like
use
a
them.
glaze.
But then,
You don't have to use these
but then in
underglazes.
all, so I do an underglaze or I do a glaze. They both get fired.
Yes.
Okay, and then I do an underglaze. Does it get fired? And then
No,
I
you
do
would
a
put
clear
clear glaze
glaze.
on it
You put the clear
immediately.
glaze on. Okay, that's
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
You let it dry, and then put the clear glaze on, and then put it on the glaze shelf.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So I'm here to answer any sort of questions.
Can I use this? I'm like, or is
Yeah,
there
I mean, I
something
don't
else?
even know foliage green. If,
I was like, I'll do that.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it.
Maybe
And
you
then
could
all
Google
of
it to see what color it is before you take a chance.
What happened?
Yeah,
Maybe
Google
you
it.
could Google it.
No, I feel like
You're
that
gonna-
sounds. I'll go by the name.
You're gonna just
Foliage green.
go